All right, let's talk about an invisible invader. We're going to do a deep dive into one of the most common and frankly serious bacterial lung infections out there, pneumococcal pneumonia. And it all starts with this one little bacterium called Streptococcus pneumoniae.
So here's the game plan. First, we're going to meet this microscopic supervillain and check out its weapons. Then, we'll trace how it invades the body. After that, we'll see the damage it can cause, how doctors figure out it's there, the arsenal we use to fight back, and finally, the best part, how we build a defense that lasts.
Okay, first things first, let's get properly introduced to our main character. You'll see its full name, Streptococcus pneumococcus, but most people just call it pneumococcus.
So, what is pneumococcal pneumonia exactly? Well, it's a really serious infection that happens way down in the tiny air sacs of your lungs. It's a classic cause of what's called lobar pneumonia, which means it can take out an entire section or lobe of a lung. And this one bacterium, Streptococcus pneumoniae, is the #1 culprit behind it.
You know, when you see this thing under a microscope, it has this really unique look. It's a gram-positive diplococcus, which is just a fancy way of saying it stains purple and hangs out in pairs. But the really cool part is its shape. They call it lanceolate, which means it literally looks like a tiny flame or the tip of a spear. That shape is a dead giveaway for the lab techs.
So you have to wonder, how does this little flame-shaped organism cause so much trouble? Well, the secret is its incredible arsenal of biological weapons. Scientists call them virulence factors, but really, they're just the tools it uses to wreak havoc. And this thing is armed to the teeth. First, it's got this polysaccharide capsule. Think of it like an invisibility cloak that lets it hide from your immune cells. Then it unleashes a toxin called pneumolysin that punches holes in your cells and paralyzes your body's first responders. It's also got these super sticky proteins called adhesins that let it latch on inside your throat and nose. But maybe the most clever trick is its self-destruct button, autolysis. It makes the bacteria explode, releasing all its guts, which triggers this huge inflammatory firestorm in your lung.
Okay, so we've met the invader, we've seen its weapons. Now how does it actually get from point A to point B and find a target?
The journey is surprisingly simple. It starts when someone who has the bacteria, and they might not even be sick, coughs or sneezes, sending it airborne in tiny droplets. You breathe it in, and then it uses those sticky adhesions we talked about to set up a little colony in the back of your nose and throat. Now, for a lot of people, that's where the story ends. It just hangs out. But if your immune system is having a bad day, that's when it makes its move, invading down into the lungs or even into the bloodstream. Now get this number is just wild. Somewhere between 70 and 90% of all kids under 5 are walking around as perfectly healthy carriers of this exact bacteria. It's just living quietly in their nose. This just goes to show you how incredibly common this bug is. It's not always about the bacteria itself, it's about whether our immune system is strong enough to keep it in check.
So, that brings us to the big question. Who's most vulnerable? Well, it's the very young and the elderly whose immune systems aren't at peak strength. And here's a really important one. People without a working spleen. See, your spleen is like a master filter for your blood, and it's especially good at grabbing bacteria that have those slippery capsules. Without it, you're missing a key line of defense. And of course, things like chronic diseases or even just getting over the flu can weaken you just enough for this opportunist to stray.
So what happens when the invasion succeeds? When pneumonia actually takes hold, the body's reaction creates a very clear set of symptoms. Let's take a look at what that picture looks like. The classic signs are a sudden high fever, sharp chest pain, and a nasty productive cough. A doctor listening to the chest would hear these little crackling sounds, and when they tap on the chest, it might sound dull. That's the sound of lung tissue filled with fluid instead of air. But this is where it can get really dangerous. If it's not stopped, the infection can spread. You can get empyema, which is a pocket of pus around the lung, or bacteremia, where the bacteria get into the blood. And from there, it can travel anywhere, causing life-threatening problems like meningitis or infections in the heart. Okay, when a patient shows up with these symptoms, it's time to launch the counterattack. And that always starts with some good old-fashioned detective work to figure out exactly what we're up against.
The first big break in the case usually comes from a really simple test, a gram stain of the patient's sputum. You put a sample under the microscope and bam, you see the evidence. You see pus cells, which tells you there's a fight going on. And right in the middle of it all, you see those unmistakable flame-shaped purple pairs of bacteria. It's a huge clue pointing straight at pneumococcus. Of course, you need to be sure, so labs have a whole toolkit to confirm it. There's a quick urine test that can spot a piece of the bacteria's capsule. They can try to grow the bacteria from a blood or sputum sample on a special plate. If they get it to grow, they can do other tests to confirm its identity, like seeing if it's sensitive to a chemical called Optochin. And for the ultimate confirmation, modern PCR tests can find the bacteria's unique DNA. It's all about building an ironclad case.
Once the culprit is unmasked, it's time to bring in the heavy hitters. We're talking about the antibiotic arsenal that we use to fight the infection head-on.
Now for a pretty standard case where the person isn't too sick, a course of oral amoxicillin can usually knock it out. But for patients who are in the hospital, doctors will go straight to more powerful IV antibiotics like penicillin or ceftriaxone. The right choice really depends on how sick the person is and what local resistance patterns look like. But that brings up a growing problem.
And that problem is resistance. So how does this work? It's actually pretty clever. Think of penicillin as a key that fits perfectly into a lock on the bacteria's cell wall. This lock is called a penicillin-binding protein, or PBP. When the key turns, the bacteria dies. But what the resistant bacteria have done is they've actually changed the shape of the lock. The penicillin key doesn't fit anymore. This is a massive challenge, especially with strains like serotype 19A, which is like a master of disguise, resistant to a whole bunch of different antibiotics.
So fighting these infections one by one is vital, but the real win is in prevention. We want to stop the fight before it even starts, and our most powerful weapon for that is vaccination.
We basically have two main types of vaccines here. The older one, PPSV23, just uses the sugary invisibility cloak from 23 different types of the bacteria. It works pretty well for adults, but it doesn't really generate a strong, lasting memory in little kids. But the newer one, PCV13, is way smarter. It takes that same sugary cloak and attaches it to a protein. This little trick gets a much more powerful part of your immune system involved, your T cells, and creates a really robust, long-term memory. It's perfect for infants. And here's the absolute game changer. Because it creates such a strong response, it actually stops kids from carrying the bacteria in their nose in the first place. That creates herd immunity, protecting the whole community, not just the person who got the shot.
So that kind of leads us with this one big thought. We are in a constant arms race with organisms like Streptococcus Pneumoniae. It's been around forever, and it's always evolving to get around our drugs. That means we have to keep evolving too, with better vaccines, smarter treatments, and new strategies. It's a battle that never really ends, and it demands we stay on our toes.